I was slicing an apple when she said it. No tremor in her voice. No hesitation. Just a simple sentence tossed into our sunny kitchen like it meant nothing. I think I want to experience life with someone else. Rachel, my wife of 7 years. The woman who used to trace lazy circles on my back while we binge-watched crime dramas and laughed about our mutual fear of escalators. I looked up from the cutting board, not because I didn't hear her clearly, but because I wanted to see her say it again with that same blank calm. And she did. She stood there barefoot, in that faded Cornell sweatshirt I bought her 2 Christmases ago, twirling the keys to her Jeep like she was talking about a yoga retreat. His name's Brandon, she added. He's spontaneous, passionate. He makes me feel awake. I should have said something right then. Thrown the apple across the room. Asked if she remembered who paid for that kitchen remodel she was standing in. Or reminded her that Brandon had once spilled a White Claw all over our wedding album at a barbecue and didn't even apologize. But I didn't. I just wiped the juice from the blade, set the knife down gently, and stared at her. A quiet war brewed inside me, a slow boil that didn't rise to the surface. Not yet. Okay, I said finally, keeping my voice even. If that's what you need. She blinked, surprised. That wasn't the reaction she'd rehearsed for. She was ready for fireworks. For me to break down, shout, slam something dramatic against the backsplash. But I didn't give her the dignity of a meltdown. You're not mad? She asked. I shrugged. Disappointed. Sure. Hurt. But mad? No. You made a choice. I'll make mine. She shifted her weight, suddenly uncertain. I'll pack a few things, she mumbled. I nodded, then added one last thing, soft, almost kind. Go. I'll wait for you. That stopped her. Mid-step, her bag slung over her shoulder, she turned back, confused. What does that mean? I didn't answer, just like she didn't deserve to hear the plan forming in the silence between my ribs. She gave a tight smirk, like she thought she'd won something. And then she left. I didn't chase her. I didn't call out. I didn't even lock the door behind her. Instead, I sat down at the table, alone, in the kitchen we'd designed together. The late morning sun spilled across the oak floors. It should have been a peaceful day, but peace has a different sound when it echoes inside an empty house. My name's Ethan. I'm a 38-year-old systems analyst, the kind of guy who color codes his closet and double-checks the locks every night. My world was built on logic, order, reliability. Rachel was the chaos I let in, because she made me feel alive. Now she was gone, and I wasn't about to beg her to come back. What she didn't realize was that the quiet she left behind was where I do my best thinking. This isn't a story about heartbreak. It's about precision, about patience, and how sometimes the sharpest revenge is the one that doesn't shout. It simply waits. What would you do if the person you trusted most mistook your calm for surrender? Stick around, because Rachel's about to learn exactly what silence sounds like when it has teeth. It had been 3 days since Rachel walked out, but her perfume still lingered in the hallway, an uninvited guest that refused to leave. I couldn't sleep the first night. My brain kept replaying our last conversation like a broken cassette. But by the second night, the ache had dulled, not disappeared, just organized itself into something manageable. That morning, I padded into my home office with a fresh cup of black coffee and a resolve I hadn't felt in years. The space looked the same, printer humming softly, family photos still pinned to the corkboard, her graduation picture tucked into the frame beside mine. I didn't remove it. Not yet. Mark showed up around 10. He didn't knock, just walked in like he used to back in college, carrying that crooked grin and a box of donuts like some peace offering for a war I hadn't declared. Mark's the kind of friend who never asks for the full story. He just shows up when the weight gets heavy. He's also the only one I ever told about Rachel's late-night texts that didn't feel friendly. He dropped the box on my desk. You eat anything today? I shrugged. Half a banana. So, no. He flopped onto the second chair and started thumbing through the files on my bookshelf without asking. You gonna tell me what happened? She left, I said, sipping my coffee. Wanted to experience life. With Brandon. He paused. That guy from her work? Apparently, he's passionate. Mark raised a brow. He wears socks with sandals and still says, "Why wello," unironically. I chuckled for the first time in days. That guy. I nodded. Mark leaned back and let out a low whistle. Wow. And then he didn't say anything else. That was his magic. He knew when to speak and when to just sit with me in the silence. A soft knock came from the hallway a few minutes later. I turned, and there she was, Julia, Mark's younger sister. She held a tray with 3 mugs and a little plate of biscotti. Brought reinforcements, she said with a smile that didn't try too hard. Julie is the kind of person you don't notice right away. Not flashy, just gentle presence, like the sound of rain on a roof. She used to come by now and then when Mark needed help with his real estate spreadsheets. Always polite, always helpful, always gone before dessert. Today, though, she lingered. She set the tray down, handed me a mug, and her fingers brushed mine briefly. Not flirtatious, just warm. Her eyes searched mine for a beat longer than they needed to. Sorry to hear about Rachel, she said softly. Thanks, I murmured, not trusting my voice. We sat for a while, the 3 of us, talking about trivial things, housing markets, local elections, how the coffee tasted burnt even though it was fresh ground. But beneath all that small talk, something shifted in me. Not romance. Not yet. Just relief. To sit in my own house, with people who didn't need me to smile, or perform, or chase. Rachel used to fill a room with her energy. Now that she was gone, the house had a different rhythm. Slower, softer, like it was exhaling for the first time in years. When Mark left later that afternoon, Julia stayed behind to help me sort through some old legal paperwork. Anything you need, she said before leaving. Seriously, Ethan, just ask. She smiled again, smaller this time. And then she was gone. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door she'd just walked through. Rachel used to slam it when she left. Julia didn't make a sound. The courthouse was just a 10-minute drive from my place, tucked between a barber shop that hadn't updated its signage since the Reagan administration and a dry cleaner run by a woman who always gave me an extra starch I didn't ask for. Downtown was quiet that morning. The kind of quiet that makes you hear your own footsteps. I'd parked in the back lot, walked past a crooked row of newspaper boxes, and paused just outside the glass door of Barnes & Corbin, attorneys at law. It was a modest firm. No sleek, modern conference rooms. Just warm mahogany walls, framed diplomas from state universities, and the faint smell of peppermint tea drifting from the secretary's desk. The man I was meeting looked like he'd aged alongside the furniture. Gray at the temples, sleeves rolled up, ties slightly loosened. Ethan, he said, extending his hand. I'm Thomas Corbin. He didn't smile much, but I liked that. Smiles, in my experience, often covered poor service or worse advice. He got right to it, walked me to his office, closed the door gently, and gestured to the chair across from his desk. I laid the folder on the table, the one with the bank statements, the texts Rachel had sent me by mistake, and yes, the marriage certificate that now felt like a receipt for something I no longer owned. Corbin skimmed the top pages, nodding occasionally. Then he looked up. You're not here to fight, he said. You're here to end this quietly. That's the goal, I replied. No drama, no blow-ups, just clean lines. He tapped the papers gently. You're aware she hasn't officially responded to any separation terms. I nodded. Even better, he said. We file, serve notice by mail, and if she doesn't contest within the response window, which she likely won't if she's still traveling, we move to default judgment. How long? He leaned back, considering. Maybe 4 weeks. Could be 3 if her address on file is accurate and no mail gets returned. That hit me harder than expected. It felt fast, clinical, and yet exactly what I wanted. She won't see it coming, I said quietly. Corbin gave me a look, neutral, but not unkind. That's often the point. I left the firm with a packet of paperwork and a faint chill down my spine. The kind you get when you realize something irreversible is in motion. A train you boarded willingly, yet still feel unsteady riding. Back home, the house greeted me with its usual hush. A coffee mug still sat in the sink from earlier that morning. Julia had stopped by again to drop off a real estate pamphlet for a client, and she'd stayed for tea this time. I glanced at the dining table. There was a smudge of lipstick on the edge of the glass she used. A deep red, not Rachel's shade. For a second, I just stood there, staring at that faint mark. Proof of something new. Not romantic. Not yet, but different. Upstairs, In the drawer where we kept the mail, I tucked the court packet beside a stack of unopened credit card offers addressed to Rachel. She'd forwarded nothing. No change of address. Not even a note. She hadn't called. Hadn't texted. Just posted another filtered photo the night before. This time from some villa with a balcony and a sunset that looked bought rather than caught. I'd stopped checking her feed. But sometimes, it still found me. And that's when it really settled in. She didn't think there'd be consequences. She thought silence meant surrender. But silence, in the right hands, is just strategy. Let her post her sunsets. Let her tan. By the time the court notices reach her, the horizon she's standing on won't be hers anymore. I hadn't planned on seeing Julia again that week. But Mark had other ideas. He called me that Thursday morning while I was halfway through scrubbing old lasagna from a baking dish. Said something about helping Julia stage a property, and you've got free hands and nothing better to do. He wasn't wrong. The place was a single-story Craftsman on Pine Grove. Empty, echoey, with dust particles dancing through the sunlight. Julia met me on the porch, clipboard in one hand, measuring tape in the other. She wore jeans, sneakers, and that faint, thoughtful smile I was beginning to notice more than I should have. "You're late," she teased. I was emotionally attached to my sponge, I replied. She laughed, a soft, real sound, and motioned me inside. The work wasn't glamorous. We moved furniture from a storage pod into the house, set up a living room to look just disheveled enough to feel lived in. Julia asked my opinion on pillow placements and art frames. I joked about being an amateur feng shui expert. She rolled her eyes. By mid-afternoon, we were both sitting on the hardwood floor, sharing a bottle of iced tea and laughing about how I'd once mistaken a bidet for a foot washer on a vacation in Rome. It sprayed directly into my chest, I said, grinning. She almost choked on her tea. "Oh my God, tell me there's a photo." "Only in my nightmares." We sat like that for a while. The job was done, but neither of us seemed in a hurry to leave. There was a stillness in the house that didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Like peace taking its first full breath after being held too long. "You seem lighter," she said suddenly, catching me off guard. I glanced down at my hands. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just less surprised now by the people who walk away. Julia tilted her head slightly, watching me. Sometimes, when someone walks out, it makes space for someone who is always standing quietly just outside the door. Her words settled between us like something fragile. We didn't touch, didn't move closer. But her presence anchored me in a way Rachel's never quite had. Not in the quiet, at least. We loaded the last of the empty boxes into her trunk, and before I could open the driver's side door for her, she paused. "You know," she said, "you're good at this." "At what? Lugging ottomans?" "No," she smiled. "Being with people, even when you're hurting." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. On the drive home, I kept replaying that afternoon. The way she'd looked at me when she thought I wasn't watching. The way her laughter had sounded. Not polite, not forced. Just free. It was the first time in weeks I hadn't thought about Rachel. Not once. And that, more than anything, reminded me I was still here. Still capable of rebuilding. Even if I didn't know what the blueprint looked like yet. Most people don't realize how loud an empty house can be. Especially one still full of someone else's things. Rachel had left her art books stacked neatly by the bedroom window, the one she always claimed she'd reread someday. Her cardigan still hung on the hook by the entryway, faintly smelling of coconut shampoo and that bergamot oil she used every night before bed. I didn't touch any of it, didn't donate, didn't pack. Instead, I started collecting. Each week, the mail brought more than bills and pizza coupons. There were envelopes marked confidential, bearing the court seal and Rachel's full name, still linked to this address she hadn't bothered to change. I logged each one, scanned them, stored the physical copies in a folder I labeled closure, not for her, but for me. I didn't open a single one. It felt cleaner that way, like setting a place at the table for the inevitable, then quietly letting it sit untouched. Rachel's digital life carried on like nothing had happened. Beach photos, cocktails, a blurry shot of Brandon pretending to grill something. Captions like, "New chapter sun with face," and "Trust the journey." I'd stopped checking her feed, but friends still sent me screenshots. Unsolicited, of course. They thought they were doing me a favor, showing me what I was missing. But the truth? They were showing me what she was blind to. The countdown had already started. The court wouldn't wait for her to return from her little self-discovery saga. And those unopened letters, stacking in their silence, were proof of it. One afternoon, I sat on the edge of our bed, flipping through a catalog that had come addressed to Ethan and Rachel Bennett. I tore the cover off, tossed it aside, then reached into my desk drawer. There it was, the growing stack, neatly ordered, all postmarked. The one on top had red ink. Final notice. Downstairs, the microwave beeped, snapping me back into the moment. I walked to the kitchen, still barefoot. The tile was cold, cooler than usual, like it remembered more than I did. I reheated leftover curry, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the table. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel tense. I didn't check my phone. I didn't wonder where Rachel was or what she might post next. I just ate. The house was still, not hollow, not haunted, just still. And while she was out chasing sunlight, I was here, preparing the dusk. The kind that closes chapters slowly. The kind that leaves no room for return. Julia had a way of appearing just when the silence started to thicken. That Tuesday evening, the doorbell rang around 6. No warning. No text. I opened it to find her standing on my porch with a loaf of something homemade, still warm in its foil. Pumpkin, she said. I figured the air smelled like October. I stepped aside without a word, letting her in. We sat in the kitchen. No music, no distractions. Just the soft tick of the wall clock and the occasional clink of her butter knife against the plate. She spread her slice with practiced care, as though the act itself was calming. So, she said finally, glancing at me. Any news? I knew what she meant. Rachel. No, I replied. But it's all moving forward. She nodded once and didn't pry. Julia never asked more than I was ready to give. And yet, something lingered in the air between us. A closeness that had grown not out of sparks or flirtation, but something slower, more patient, a kind of quiet recognition. She leaned back in her chair, studying the steam rising from her tea. You ever notice how some people walk into your life loud and bright, like fireworks? She said. And others just sit beside you and wait for the noise to settle? Her voice was soft, not searching, not pushing, just observing. Yeah, I said. I noticed now. There was a pause. The kind that usually lives before confessions. I thought, for a brief second, that I might reach across the table, take her hand, tell her how the world felt less jagged when she was near, how my thoughts quieted when she spoke. But instead, I just reached for my mug and took a sip, because something inside me wasn't ready yet. Maybe it was the part still processing the weight of betrayal. Or maybe it was that Julia deserved more than a half-healed man with court documents in his drawer. She didn't say anything else about it. When she stood to leave, I walked her to the door. The night air was cool, but not cold. Crisp, like the pages of a book freshly opened. She turned on the step, hands tucked into her coat pockets. I know you're not ready, she said, meeting my eyes. And I'm not here to rush you. I swallowed, throat tight. But just so you know, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, I'm not leaving. She smiled, gentle, unforced, and walked down the path toward her car. I stood there a long time after she was gone. Not moving, not thinking, just feeling. That night, I lay awake longer than usual. The house was quiet, and not in the lonely way it used to be. More like it was holding its breath. Julia had become a constant in the way sunlight creeps across the floor each morning. Slow, dependable, comforting. And though I hadn't stepped fully into that warmth yet, I was no longer hiding from it either. It started with a text. From Drew, of all people. A mutual friend we hadn't seen in months. Rachel's old college buddy turned occasional backyard barbecue guest. Hey, just checking in. Is it true what I heard? About you and someone new? No punctuation. No smiley face. Just vague enough to be bait. I stared at the screen for a full minute before replying. Depends on what you heard. He left it at that. Typical Drew. The kind of guy who wanted to stir the water just enough to see what might float up. I didn't respond again, but I knew that meant something had reached her. A rumor, a whisper, a shifting current. And I knew exactly where that rumor would land. Right in Rachel's curated illusion that I was still waiting for her. She hadn't blocked me. She hadn't messaged either. But when I checked her page again, just once, Out of morbid curiosity, I noticed a pattern. The beach shots were still there, but no new faces. Brandon had vanished. Her captions, once overflowing with emojis and wanderlust hashtags, had shrunk to generic lines. Cloudy skies. Taking time to reflect. Even the color of her photos had changed. Muted. Cooler tones. Less contrast. That's the thing about people who crave attention. They don't know how to sit in silence. And silence was all I was giving her. By the end of the week, I'd received 2 more messages from acquaintances we used to see at gallery openings and holiday parties. Heard you're back on your feet. Good for you, man. Ran into Julia at a showing. She's lovely. You two look good together. I didn't respond to either, but I knew Rachel would hear it. I knew her circle well. People who pretended not to gossip while passing information like poker chips. And still, she didn't reach out. That part stung more than I expected. I don't know what I thought would happen. That she'd come home in a rush of regret? That she'd try to apologize, or at least ask for clarity. But there was nothing. Just silence. Which, ironically, was mine to begin with. One evening, I was walking out to the mailbox when I saw our neighbor, Mrs. Langley, watering her front garden. She waved, as always, then hesitated. I heard about the divorce, she said gently. Her watering can paused mid-pour. I nodded. It's been a process. Well, she said with a kind smile, you look more alive these days. Sometimes things fall apart, so better things can grow. I thanked her and walked back to the house, her words echoing more than they should have. Inside, I opened the mailbox. 2 more letters addressed to Rachel, both marked urgent. I stacked them with the others. That night, I sat in the living room with the lights off, the court papers beside me, and Rachel's silence like a ghost in the room. And I realized something. She thought I'd crumble. She thought my quiet was weakness. But every unopened envelope in that drawer was a seed. And when it all finally reached her, it wouldn't be a confrontation. It would be a reckoning. It was raining the morning I finalized my divorce. Not the dramatic kind. No thunder, no wind. Just a steady drizzle that painted the city gray and blurred the windshield in a way that made everything feel slightly unreal. I parked a block away from the courthouse, took the umbrella from the passenger seat, and walked alone toward the entrance. No reporters, no screaming match, just me, dressed in a navy suit I hadn't worn since my last promotion review, holding a folder that could have passed for a resume if anyone bothered to look. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The benches were sparsely filled, 2 elderly women murmuring about someone's will, a man tapping away at his phone, a young woman nervously folding and unfolding a tissue. My attorney, Thomas Corbin, was already seated in the chamber hallway. He looked up, gave me a nod. Ready? Let's finish it, I said. We walked into the courtroom together. It wasn't some grand chamber like in movies, just a plain room with wood paneling and a few too many chairs. The judge looked over the file briefly, asked Corbin a few procedural questions, then turned to me. Mr. Bennett, your spouse was served the initial filing, correct? Yes. And she's failed to respond to any court notices or appear today. She's traveling. The judge nodded, impassive. Very well. Based on the documentation provided and no contest, I'm issuing a default judgment. That was it. No gavel. No dramatic pause. Just a click of the pen. A signature. A chapter closed in silence. Corbin stood, gathered the papers with practiced efficiency, and turned to me as we exited the room. You're officially divorced. The words felt weightless. Like ash. Something once burning, now cold. I stepped outside, into the soft drizzle, and looked up at the clouded sky. No symbolism. No sudden ray of sun. Just freedom. And not the kind Rachel had chased through airports and oceans. This freedom came with quiet. With ownership. With the simple truth that she couldn't touch me anymore. Not legally, not emotionally. Later that evening, I sat on my porch with a glass of something sharp. The rain had stopped, but the street still glistened. A car passed slowly, headlights sweeping across the pavement like a searchlight. I didn't text anyone, didn't announce it, but I knew the silence would reach her. At some point, days from now, maybe weeks, Rachel would check her mailbox wherever she was. She'd see the final notice, the date missed, the judgment rendered without her. She'd realize the door she thought was propped open had been sealed shut, and I wouldn't need to say a word. Because when someone builds their identity on control, the thing that breaks them isn't confrontation. It's being irrelevant. It didn't happen all at once. There was no grand apology, no frantic call from a blocked number, no weepy voicemail from a tropical balcony. Rachel didn't reappear with mascara-stained cheeks or trembling hands begging for another shot. Instead, it started with her social feed. Not that I checked it often anymore, but sometimes, when insomnia crept in and silence pressed a little too hard, I'd scroll. And that's when I noticed it. The colors were gone. Not literally. Filters still did their best, but there was something missing underneath them. The energy, the tone. The photos had become bland. Where there were once snapshots of laughter, cocktails, oceanside brunches with boho captions, now there were muted skylines, an occasional quote post, and more than a few selfies that looked like she was trying too hard to look like she wasn't trying. Brandon? Gone. Deleted without ceremony. Not a single trace left. Her captions were shorter now. Stillness. Not every journey ends where you think it will. Some lessons hurt. Cryptic. Empty. The kind of things people post when they're trying to sound wise, but don't yet know what the lesson is. I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt distant, like I was watching the sun set behind a place I no longer lived in. I hadn't posted anything myself in months. There was no competition, no counter-narrative to push. I wasn't flaunting Julia, wasn't hinting at a glow-up. I just lived, and maybe that's what unsettled her most. Because Rachel lived for performance. And without me watching, the spotlight must have felt cold. One night, I got a message from an old mutual friend, Carrie. We weren't close, but she was always the one who floated between circles, keeping tabs without ever seeming nosy. Saw Rachel yesterday. Looked rough. Asked about you. Didn't say much. Just thought you'd want to know. I didn't reply, but I stared at those words for a long time. Looked rough. Asked about you. Didn't say much. It made sense. She hadn't seen the fall coming because she never believed I'd let go. She thought the silence was submission, that the lack of reaction meant I was still stuck. But silence had been my strategy, not my sentence. And now she was starting to understand just how far she'd fallen behind. Later that week, I passed by the front hallway and caught sight of her coat, still hanging on the wall hook where she left it. For a second, I reached toward it. Then I stopped, because it didn't belong to her anymore. It belonged to the version of her I'd outgrown, the one who thought I'd always be waiting. But I wasn't. Not anymore. It was quiet when Julia arrived. A kind of deliberate quiet, the kind that settles over a room when something important is about to be said, but no one knows who should go first. She held a bottle of champagne in one hand and a paper bag in the other. I brought pie, she said, lifting it slightly. Because apparently, I can't show up without baked goods. I stepped aside, let her in. You're setting a dangerous precedent. She smiled, but there was something behind it, a flicker of uncertainty. She knew what today meant. It was the first day I'd woken up officially divorced. No more pending, no more processing, just a signed, sealed document and a name on the line that didn't belong to Rachel anymore. The house felt different. Not cleaner, not emptier, just rebalanced. Like the furniture had finally stopped shifting beneath my feet. We sat in the living room, the champagne between us, the flutes untouched for a while. She looked around. You moved the coffee table. I glanced at it. It's off-center now. I think I like it that way. Julia nodded slowly. Sometimes symmetry's overrated. We didn't talk about Rachel. Not directly. But the absence of her, of all that weight, filled the room like a scent recently gone. Eventually, I poured us each a glass. To something, I said, raising mine without ceremony. To whatever comes next, she replied. We drank in silence. It wasn't romantic. Not yet. But it was warm. Safe. Earned. After the pie was half eaten and the sky outside had turned navy, Julia leaned back against the couch cushion and studied me for a long time. You know, she said quietly, when Mark told me you and Rachel split, I didn't think. I mean, I wasn't expecting to spend time here. With you. Like this. Neither did I admitted. She tilted her head. But I'm glad I did. There was something in her eyes then. Something that didn't ask for more than I could give, but let me know she'd stay if I reached for her. I didn't. Not yet. But I didn't retreat either. Me too, I said. She stood up a little later, gathered her things, and I walked her to the door. She hesitated on the porch, looking at me like there was more she wanted to say. Instead, she just leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to my cheek. Not lingering, not expectant, just kind. "I'll see you soon," she said, then turned and walked into the night. I stood in the doorway for a long time, the cool air brushing against my skin, the taste of champagne still on my tongue. The house was warm behind me, but something told me that warmth wasn't just in the walls anymore. It was in the absence of what used to be, and in the presence of what could be. It happened on a Tuesday, late afternoon, the sun casting long amber lines across the kitchen tiles. I was pouring the last of the champagne into 2 glasses, Julia beside me, her laugh still soft from a joke I barely remember telling. The house felt different now, not in layout, but in energy. It was a home again. Then came the knock. Sharp, not hesitant. I didn't need to look. I already knew. Julia glanced at me, sensing the shift. I nodded toward the hallway. "I'll handle it." Rachel stood on the front step, arms folded, sunglasses perched on her head, even though the sun was setting behind her. Her lips parted slightly, just enough to start talking, but not enough to be sure of what she was about to say. She looked frayed, not messy, not disheveled, but tired in a way I'd never seen before. Behind her, the evening breeze rustled the trees. Behind me, Julia waited quietly in the kitchen, knowing not to interrupt. Rachel's eyes swept past me, scanning the interior like she expected to find her coat still on the hook, her mug still on the counter, her name still on the air. But this place no longer made room for ghosts. "What the hell is going on?" she asked, voice low and cold. "I just got back and found this." She held up a bundle of court notices, wrinkled, unopened, mailed weeks ago. "My stack." I stepped aside, walked to the drawer beside the stairs, and pulled the rest out. 37 pieces of mail, each one bearing her name, each one untouched by her hand until now. I handed them to her silently. Her fingers curled around the pile, and I watched her scan the top letter. As she read, her expression crumbled, one crack at a time. You filed?" she whispered. "For weeks ago," I replied calmly. "Default judgment. It's finalized." "No," she said, shaking her head slowly, like the papers would rearrange themselves if she denied them long enough. "No, this isn't how it ends." I met her eyes. It already did. Her mouth opened, then closed. She tried again. "You didn't call. You didn't warn me. You told me to trust the journey," I said, stepping back slightly. "So I did. Mine." She looked past me again, toward the kitchen. "Is she here, Julia?" I didn't answer. The silence told her everything. Rachel's jaw tensed, a familiar fire igniting behind her eyes. But this time, it didn't scare me. This time, her rage was just a match without fuel. "You waited for me," she said bitterly. "You said you would." "I did," I replied evenly. "And while I waited, I realized something. I wasn't hoping you'd come back. I was hoping I'd forget the version of me who ever wanted you to." She blinked, like I'd slapped her with words she didn't know I had. And then I stepped closer, not angry, not cruel. "Just done. Maybe you want to try with someone else," I said, nodding toward the street where her car sat idling. "Because this isn't your home anymore." Rachel stared at me, the papers in her hand trembling now. Her voice, when it finally came, was small. "You really don't care?" "I did," I said, "and I gave that care a funeral." She didn't cry. Rachel never cried when people were watching. She just nodded once, turned without another word, and walked down the steps. The door closed behind her with the gentlest click I'd ever heard. No slamming, no drama, just finality. Back in the kitchen, Julia was still holding both glasses. She didn't ask what happened. She just handed me mine. "To new blueprints," she said softly. I raised my glass. "To finally building something that lasts." And we clinked them together in the quiet. Because sometimes, the strongest statement isn't a scream. It's simply closing the door and not looking back.